Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for tuning into this short screen tutorial on how to answer the 16 mark questions for the Edexcel GCSE History Unit 3B. In the case of my students, that's War and the Transformation of British Society between 1931 and 1951. But whatever Unit 3 module you're doing, the exam technique is exactly the same, so there's no need to worry, this is still applicable to you. Okay, then we'll get started. We're going to go through some general tips, how to answer the question. Then we're going to look at the success criteria and the mark scheme, so how you get top marks. Then we are going to go waggle, which means what a good one looks like. I've got an exemplar answer from one of my students. So we'll take a look at that and see what they've done well and where they can improve. So let's get on with it, shall we? There's an exemplar question then. So it says, study the three sources and use your own knowledge. SPAG, so spelling, punctuation and grammar, will be assessed in this question, so that's very, very important. Here we have an interpretation. Source F suggests that civilian morale was badly affected by the Blitz. How far do you agree with that interpretation? So you need to use your own knowledge, the three sources that are specified. Any other sources if you want to help you explain your answer. Okay then, wrong way. There we go, right. So how many marks available? 19. You get 16 for the question, 3 for good spelling, punctuation and grammar. Excellent. You have about 20 minutes in the examination to answer this question. So when you break that down, that means you've got about 8 minutes to support that interpretation, another 8 to challenge it. Then you're going to have about 4 minutes to reach a judgment. So you don't have much time. You've got to make every minute count. How many sections? Well, 3. Support, challenge, then reach a judgment. Nice and simple so far. Okay then. The correct structure, the right way I would suggest to answer one of these questions, use paragraphs. If you don't use paragraphs, then you're basically forcing the examiner to go through your answer and find out where the different sections are, which you don't want, because that will confuse them and potentially leave you open to getting fewer marks. So to make it simple for them and for you, support that interpretation using the sources and your own knowledge, challenge, doing the same, then reach a nice balanced judgment. You know, to a large extent, the evidence supports this interpretation, etc., etc., etc. Now, you haven't got to use all the sources to support, then use them all again to challenge. Just use the 3 at some point in your answer. Some will support, some will challenge, some will be halfway. So use them all at some point, because you need to, and your own knowledge too. Okay then, this is the wrong structure. Don't do it this way. It makes it hard for you. It makes linking of sources really, really difficult, and it makes it really, really tough on the examiner, because if you just discuss one source at a time, like discussing source 1, then source 2, then source 3, source 1 might support that interpretation, source 2 might challenge it, but then source 3 might support it again. So you're going to have like supporting challenge, it just gets really messy. And what you can't do if you're just doing one source at a time is link sources together to construct strong arguments for or against that interpretation. So don't do that. It doesn't work, it's difficult, it's messy, and it's just generally simplistic and will lead to you just describing the sources, which is not what you want. You want to construct arguments that support, then challenge, then you reach a judgment. So don't do it that way. Don't do one source at a time. It doesn't work, and it will lead to low marks. So do it the other way, not this way. To make sure that you tick all the boxes, what I would do, if you've got time, that's just a suggestion. Tick off the sources as you go. Once you've used source D, tick it off. Once you've used source D, once you've used source F, then you won't forget to include them. Have you used own knowledge yet? When you've put something specific in, have you supported, challenge and reached judgment? Once you've got ticks in all the right places, you know that your answer is looking good, because you've not missed out any of the core elements that Edexcel will be looking for. So I would suggest, if you've got time and if it's helpful, to do something like that. Additional knowledge. Now, lots of candidates fall down on additional knowledge because they include knowledge that was either in a different source, or it's too general or too vague or factually incorrect. Try to be as precise as possible to ensure that the examiner A, notices it, and B, gives you the credit you deserve for it. Use things like names, dates, stats, facts, figures, data, any specifics that are not in any of the sources. So just try to be as precise as you can, and then you've got maximum chance of the examiner noticing it and then giving you the marks for it, which is obviously what you want, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. What does the success criteria look like then? What does the mark scheme say you need to do to get top marks? Let's have a look. Right. For level 4, 13 to 16 marks, so top marks, you need a sustained argument and evaluation, okay? Reviewing alternative views, so you need to support, then challenge, before giving a balanced judgment on the interpretation. So alternative views is for and against, then you give a judgment on how far you agree with that interpretation. Let's get into the minutiae, the nitty-gritty, shall we? The answer considers the evidence which supports the interpretation and considers counter-evidence. We've just said that, nice and easy. The evaluation of the interpretation is supported by precisely selected evidence from the sources, so you must use quotes from them, and additional knowledge. So you can't do one or the other. It's not sources or additional knowledge, it's sources and additional knowledge. You can only get top marks for this if you take into account the strength of the evidence from the provided sources when reaching your conclusion. So you're not just looking at the content, what's in the sources, you're looking at the context, the nature, the origin, the purpose. You're stacking up knowledge on either side to see which side, the for or against, is the strongest. You must take that into account when reaching your judgment. Do it before, do it in your for and against, but you must then refer back to that when making your judgment in order to get 15 or 16. If you don't, you won't. It's as simple as that. You must do it. If you don't include in the sources, you're in trouble because you won't get any more than 8, so you must mention them, and you must mention them all. If you don't add any own knowledge, you're going to be capped at 10. So your source work could be immense. You could look at the strength of the evidence, but if you don't have any own knowledge, you're capped at 10, which will be pretty disastrous. So use the sources and your own knowledge. Okay then, what does a good answer look like? Fortunately, I have one I cooked earlier, or one of my outstanding pupils cooked for me. All of my pupils are brilliant, so here's an exemplar answer for you. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. So let's have a look what they've done well and see if we can incorporate that into our own practice. So how does it start? Source F supports or suggests that the civilian morale was dented, so they are supporting that interpretation to start with. But look here, they're doing it to an extent, so they're supporting it by degrees. It's not all-out support or all-out challenge. It's nice and balanced from the get-go. Here we go, some nice, precise own knowledge right here. 43,000, that is pretty much bang on. Nice, you know, the examined board can't argue with that. It's statistical, excellent. They've then moved into another source, so they have discussed already source F and source A in the first paragraph, linking those sources together to construct arguments. Brilliant. No one source at a time here, just what the exam board would like to see. We've got more own knowledge here. London is losing sleep because of the intensity of the bombing. Excellent. Encouragingly here, they've referred back to the question, so it did have a huge impact on the people. Brilliant. A nice mini judgment there. Then they've linked it to the next paragraph. Brilliant. No disjointed bits of the answer here. It's all married and interlocked together, which is fantastic. So they're now mentioning source D. So this candidate is very, very cleverly mentioned, you know, a range of sources within half a page. Fantastic. Also got source E in here. All the sources on the first page. A little bit disappointing they haven't mentioned source F, so you must mention the sources specifically when you're quoting from them. Don't just expect the examiner to know which source you're quoting from. You must mention that. Then they've linked a source with some own knowledge here, which is fantastic. So, excellent. Nature, origin and purpose of the source has been included, which is exactly again what the exam board want to see, discussing the reliability of sources, how much can we trust them from the provenance, the author, the date, the time, etc. One of the sources could have been opposed, so whilst the content of the source, the picture of the people whose house has been blown up very sadly, they're there sort of looking happy with their thumbs up, the content would suggest it didn't dent morale. They've then sort of delved into the provenance of that source. It could have been posed, it could have been propaganda. Nice leading language, nice linking here furthermore. So again, interlocking arguments, marrying sources together, which is, brilliant. We've come down to the conclusion here. Now, many candidates make the mistake of just throwing in a sentence at the end to conclude, I think the interpretation is wrong, because of what I've said earlier. You can do that, but you're not going to get the marks that you deserve for doing that. The conclusion has to be like the grand finale of your essay. You've got to get the 15 or 16, look at the reliability of the sources. You've got to weigh up that evidence, and you've got to basically state why you've reached the decision that you've reached. Now, the decision you reach is fine, whatever that is, as long as it's to an extent. It's not I completely agree or I completely disagree. It's going to be tempered and somewhere in the middle to show that you've looked at both sides of that argument. So let's have a look at this candidate's judgment then. It definitely was a great impact by the Blitz on the people, but it is safe to say that the main objective wasn't accomplished. The Ministry of Education worked hard to boost propaganda to convince people in Germany that the morale was higher than ever, so excellent. Ministry of Information using some own knowledge there. This suggests that there was an extra effort taken to overcome this hardship faced by civilians in Britain. Furthermore, it is strongly supported by Source F, so just recapping on how they've reached that judgment. Finally, it's safe to say from Source F, this is true to an extent, that civilian morale was badly affected by the Blitz. So reached a nice solid judgment there, but nice and measured and tempered as well. It's not the interpretation is true, it's not, it's false, it's somewhere in between, so taking account of both sides of those arguments. Now, what did this candidate get? If we look up at 13 and 16, is it a sustained argument evaluation? Yes, it is. Do they review both sides of the argument? Yes, they do. Have they given a balanced judgment? Well, we've just seen that, so yes, they do. Consider both support and challenge. Precisely selected evidence from the sources, yep. And own knowledge, yes, we've seen that. For 15 and 16, they need to consider the strength of the evidence in the conclusion. Now, they've done that to an extent. That's why it's chevron there, so it goes sort of green, red, green, red, green, red. They have done that, but that could have been a little bit stronger, in my opinion, in the answer for 16 out of 16. Spelling, punctuation, and grammar is absolutely fine. So I've given them 15 for the question, 3 for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. That is a really, really positive total of 18 out of 19, very impressive. But we always want to improve, so their targets were to be more explicit and specific when weighing and accounting for the strength of the evidence in their conclusion. Don't let the examiner overlook it. Examiners are hard-pressed people. If you don't make it obvious to them, they might well miss it. So mention those words, use that leading language, strength of evidence in the conclusion. And I've also put here, introduce nature, origin, purpose earlier in the answer to save the examiner, hunting it down. So get it in earlier, make the examiner feel at ease so they haven't got to go hunting for it. All in all, that's a pretty brilliant answer. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you do very, very well in your question 5 16-mark question. And any feedback, please let me know at History Chappy. That's on the Twitter, or www.historychappy.com.